Welcome to the Aviation Pros Podcast, the go-to platform for professionals in the aviation industry. Powered by AviationPros.com, the leading source for comprehensive news, insights, and data on airport operations. Whether you're focused on airport management, improvement programs, ground handling, equipment, MRO, or FBO operations, we've got you covered with the expertise and resources you need to stay ahead. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Aviation Pros Podcast. I'm Joe Petrie, Editor-in-Chief for Airport Business. As airports face growing pressure to balance capacity, security, and passenger experience, few leaders have had a front row seat in the industry evolution quite like Ed Freni. After more than 2 decades with Massport and a career that spans both airline operations and airport leadership, Freni has helped guide Boston Logan through some of the aviation's most defining moments, from post-9/11 transformation to large-scale terminal modernization and sustainable passenger growth. As Freni approaches retirement from his position, we explore how that experience shaped his approach to leadership style, why relationships and daily coordination remain a backbone of airport operation, and what today's airport executives can learn about resilience, planning, and uncertainty, and managing complexity at scale. All right, Ed, well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today. Obviously, you've had a long and very successful career in aviation, and you've done a lot of things, you've seen a lot of things, and it's, been able to accomplish a lot of things with Massport. More than 2 decades with the organization after coming from the airline side. How did this transition shape the way you approach airport leadership?
Well, the years of experience that I had at American, the key ones were my last 5 years when I was the general manager of the operation here at Logan. In those days, American had the biggest operation here. We were the same size as Delta and JetBlue today. Interesting job. It was a time in my life where I was looking to kind of get my feet more planted permanently here and not having to move. So an opportunity came up where there was an early retirement. So at that point, I had already talked twice to the guy that was doing my job here as the aviation director, and he tried to convince me to come over to the airport side. I thought I knew everything about airplanes and, everything you needed to know about operations, and it didn't take long to figure out that I had a lot of stuff to learn when I got here at the airport. It was a whole different side of things. But the advantage I had was I'm working with, other airline managers who knew I've done the job. So, it was a distinct advantage that I had been in their shoes, helped a lot as far as relationships and their understanding of me trying to help them because, they're our customer and they're the ones that we have to rely on for airport operations. So that was really that helpful, having that background, knowing, what they do, and then working with them after we've established relationships over time really, really is helpful to this day.
So I want to take you all the way back to the beginning when you took over as director of aviation. What were some of the biggest operational gaps or opportunities you saw at that time?
Well, I took over this job in 2007. So I had prior to that, been director of operations at the airport. So, we had gone through, obviously, 9/11. It was 6 years behind us when I took the position, but I was here then that particular day. I was only 1 year with Massport when 9/11 hit. But, we also, the whole airline industry was transitioning. We had been through a number of mergers, up to the point where I took this job. The industry was kind of in a little bit of a turmoil because we were heading towards the recession in 2007, 2008. So there were acquisitions going on, a lot of changes in the industry. So, the airport needed to be ready for that. On top of all the work we had done after 9/11 to get this airport ready for upcoming businesses, the mergers and acquisitions that were going to impact the operations. So we had to be ready. We had to make changes. We wanted to, make it easier for us when airlines merge so that we can move them and co-locate them. So we had to get ourselves ready with connecting terminals inside security. And on the way through that, we had to make improvements to the facilities that we already had. And we also had to kind of develop new facilities based on those mergers. We had to co-locate Delta, Northwest, Continental, United, and then later on, American, U.S. Airways. So those are some of the bigger ones. Southwest had merged with AirTran. And, dealing with that's not easy when you have 4 different buildings like we have here at Logan, 4 different terminals. So, we really had to get ourselves ready so that we could easily maneuver around and co-locate these airlines together. And the only way you could do that is to kind of connect everything inside security. So our goal was to do that. We haven't attained that goal completely until just now, where we are building what we call an A to B connector, which will then connect the terminals from A all the way through E. So you can traverse going through any checkpoint, and you can merge airlines and, move them side by side, kind of with less issues than you would if you had to pick them up lock, stock, and barrel and, locate them to another area. So, yeah, we had to get the airport ready for that. And we also had to get the airport ready for the projections that we saw for the growth. We lost a lot of business on 9/11, and we gained it back pretty quickly. Once we had, our goal was to kind of harden the target here and make sure everybody understood what the risks were in the world, and how could we do that to get the traveling public's confidence back. And we did a lot of work up to that point, and we had to continue that, by hiring experts to learn that side of the world, which none of us, frankly, knew anything about that, in 2000. I didn't know who Osama bin Laden was, or Muhammad Atta. And then we all became security experts. So one of the keys to that was we developed what we call an 8:30 meeting. And so every single day we meet together with all the stakeholders of the airport, all the decision makers. We started it on 9/11, and everybody determined that 8:30 in the morning would be a time of the day that we could meet collectively. And we have religiously met every day since then. I think we're the only airport in the country that does that. We established it as a no-nonsense type meeting, but it really was based on relationships. So, all of those key players understood our mission, bought into it, and had, we really have no egos in the room. We decided it would be no nonsense. It would be information that would be relevant to everybody in the room. It wasn't a place to complain. But with your relationships, you could probably take care of your business pretty quickly just by some chatter before the meeting starts, and relationships that developed and talk that happens after the meeting. So I take pride in the fact that we developed that meeting, and we still do it today. And it really has a lot to do with the success of what we've done over the years.
And of course, Massport goes beyond Logan when it comes to airports. You also got Hanscom and Worcester. How does your leadership approach differ across these different airport environments that you're trying to, co-manage on this?
Well, first of all, you have to have really good, talented people, working with you. I know you've heard these lines before, but, the people that we've had running the other 2 airports, Sharon Williams is one of them. She's one of the candidates for my replacement. Andy Davis runs Worcester. And, we try to kind of emulate what we're doing here at Logan, even though those airport operations is very, very different. But again, I think the relationships that we develop and the trust that we earn, with our stakeholders, people who use our airports, our traveling public, we do the same thing in all 3 airports. We basically have, the same theory, the same methods, and really the same approach. And they buy into it, they like it, and it's from the heart. We believe in it, and we just try to be consistent with all 3 airports, depending on whatever business. So Worcester has commercial service, Hanscom doesn't, but Hanscom has a tremendous GA activity, general aviation, and it's a reliever for Logan Airport. So all key, we meet together, we talk with each other on a regular basis, and that's kind of the way we've managed over time.
Now, I want to go back to what you're talking about with being at Logan on 9/11, just being absolute front line of, easily the biggest tragedy that's ever happened in, aviation in the United States' history as well. Just that being said, I mean, you mentioned the meeting, the morning meeting, everything like that. How did this day fundamentally change your perspective on airport operations and responsibility?
It was incredible. A day that we'll never forget. I'll never forget. I was the senior manager on duty that day. The person that was in my job was up in Montreal at an industry convention, and some of the other leaders of Logan were there with him. So we really had to get our act together with all what was going on. Many different agencies converged on this airport, as you probably know. We had FBI, CIA, locals, government officials, military, and we really had to kind of work with that and not lose the confidence that we had lost immediately. We were the second last airport to reopen. It was about four days. It took us a little longer because of the proximity of our parking garages and so forth that we had to clear out and do things. We had to face reality big time. We all realized what we had to do, and we all grouped together and made it our mission to make sure everything we did was concentrating on the safety and security of the users of the airport. So we had a significant investment. We were the first airport to have inline screening. It was congressional mandate, but we did it first, and put miles and miles of baggage handling tracks and so forth in the airports to isolate bags, and we just concentrated on that. In the meantime, we wanted to make sure people were comfortable, coming here. We tried to make it as easy as possible and greet people. We had a large sense of safety. We increased our presence with our law enforcement, a lot of visibility, and really concentrating on making people comfortable. So, and then we've kept that along the way as we've grown, as we built new areas of the airport. We open places and open different terminals, and what we have in mind is efficiency, safety, and security. And we try to make the traveling public safe and secure. I guess I keep saying that, but that was what kind of our focus was. Mm-hmm. Things changed, technology changed. Our systems were all done, and then the evolution of the TSA, which we were advocates, of federalizing, that work at the airports. And we saw that evolve, and we really kind of standardized, unified, and did everything we could to support the TSA to this day. I don't know if you're aware of this, but during this whole shutdown period, both the 41-day shutdown and the 44-day shutdown, we never had the lines that you may have heard about through the country. And in fact, we have information that shows that we were the best performing airport as far as wait times were during the shutdowns. In fact, our wait times really didn't get any worse. In fact, some days during this shutdown, they improved. And so, I can't tell you, Joe, how many times I get text messages from friends, others that, how long are the lines at Logan? And I continuously say in the last 44 days, there are no lines. And that's all about the relationships that we have with the TSA and that we've developed with them. They meet with us every morning too. Their leadership, their FSD, their deputy FSD, their leadership, they meet at 8:30 with us. We talk about what's going on. We talk about details of staffing issues, and we support them. We supported them during the shutdown as well.
So tell me, in the immediate aftermath of an event like 9/11, what were some of the most difficult operational decisions you had to make that people on the outside might not fully understand?
Well, there were a whole bunch. I mean, we actually hired an expert from Ben Gurion Airport, and he made suggestions that we adopted. Most of us were wide open and ready for that anyway, because we were always focused on the operation, making sure everything went smoothly. Bags got screened and people got in airplanes. And like I said, nobody knew who bin Laden was. So we've done, awareness training here. We adopted the mantra of see something, say something. We've embedded that in the way we do business here. The traveling public would see more visibility. We adopted, we have patrols with long guns that walk around the airport, like you used to see just in Europe or in South America, but now you'll see it in a number of airports. But we adopted it right away. Canine units around and out. We just wanted to make sure that the traveling public felt that they were secure. On top of all the other things that we do to make it easy, but we want to have a clean facility, a safe facility, and an efficient facility, and everybody's got that in their head. Everybody walks around in leadership looking for that and correcting that if they see something that needs to be fixed. So we just keep that position, and it works.
And you mentioned it about having the morning meeting every single day, 8:30, coordination, communication, all those things with these different stakeholders. That kind of being said, I mean, how did this experience shape Massport's long-term approach to security resilience and coordination with its federal agencies?
Well, a couple of things happened. Our board embraced, everything that we suggested and learned and wanted to kind of fix by, funding things that we needed to do to improve and harden the target. So that was one step. The other is, as I said, we work hand in hand, particularly like with the TSA. I think we're probably the only airport that has TSA leadership on the same floor in a building here at the airport with our operations people. So we're working side by side, same floor, offices next to each other. So we've integrated and incorporated, all those different things. We have a joint terrorism task force that's here that we've incorporated into our way of doing business on a daily basis, which we know each other. So we've helped support, FAMs that come through here, federal air marshals, the TSA officers, the state police. I mean, the state police have been incredible. They're our law enforcement here, Massachusetts State Police, just their presence in uniform. And all those organizations work together. In fact, Massport has its own police force that's primarily over in the seaport area, but we'll use them on details here at the airport, and they've bought into what we do here. And they do the same thing over at the maritime unit where they handle cruise ships and cargo ships. And there's a fair amount of property over in the seaport that Massport owns and operates, and the state police are the law enforcement jurisdiction there. So everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows the major. The major has a dotted line report to me and the colonel, and we work very closely with the leadership in the Commonwealth. We work very closely with Boston PD and their leadership. Our fire rescue groups work with our cities that surround our airports for mutual aid. We go in both directions. They help us when we need some issues. They train with us, and we do the same with the cities that surround the airport for mutual aid when we're able to send, our firefighters out to help close by. And community relations are, it's huge. We try to, communicate closely with the community as we start to develop things. We've built runways, we've built taxiways. We don't want to, make it more difficult for any of our people that live around the airports. So we've had, we have programs where we've helped, with their houses, in the contours of noise contours, and we've done that program with the FAA, and we've done everything we can to kind of help with the communities that surround our airport. So it's a relationship that goes far beyond the walls of the terminals here at Logan.
Shifting, looking over the course of your career, Logan has gone through a significant modernization. What projects or initiatives do you think are the most lasting on the operational impact?
Well, I think the improvements we've made to the terminals, aside from the airfields, the airfield is still in great shape. We put a center field taxiway in years ago that, gets airplanes out to the takeoff areas quicker and back off the landing areas faster to the terminals. We did commission a new runway in 2006, which was a short runway, but it helped in operations after we'd have a northeaster here. When the wind shift, we needed a runway to take some of the smaller airplanes out of our mix. Those have been significant improvements on the airfield. Around the terminals, we did a makeover in Terminal B, which was incredible. Before my existence, they called it Logan Mod. Massport had done a section of Terminal E, and then just recently, in the last 5 years, we built on that, and then put a new terminal in it. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it has the red roof, looks like a spaceship. It's one of the nicest terminals in the country. Very efficient to help with our growth in the international business, which is about 90% of our business. We've co-located, the airlines that have merged and acquisitions that have taken place. We are in the process right now of building a transportation center across from Terminal E that will make it more efficient. You remember the onslaught of the Uber and Lyft world, when it took over all the roadways, and, I think most airports were overwhelmed by how fast that business took. We had to react to that. We had to find places that made it easier for the Ubers and Lyft to operate and closest they could get to our terminal front doors. We have a lot of congestion around our roadways. We fixed our roadways, upper and level roadways. We're continuing that with this new transportation center that we're building. We built a rent-a-car center in the last 15 years, which is very close to the terminals, which we have isolated both arrivals and departures so that they're not merging when they go either drop off or pick up their vehicles. Very efficient area that we built. We put 2 hotels on the property. We have a Hilton hotel that has 650 beds. We have a Hyatt on one side of the airport that has 250 beds. We've done Terminal A was a brand new greenfield build after 9/11. I already talked about B, and especially after when United and American merged, we did a great haul there and did that whole area over and connected. When United and Continental merged, we connected Terminal B. I don't know if you're aware, but Terminal B has got a parking garage between it, but it is connected, so it's got two sides of the building. So we've improved all those areas. We're in the throes of trying to improve our oldest terminal right now, Terminal C, which is primarily housed by JetBlue. There's a lot of work that we want to do in there, and we're finding ways to fund that and get that going. Our footprint is only 1,500 acres, so we've built on just about every square foot of this airport, and hopefully in an efficient, in a user-friendly way. With what we had to work with. There is still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of work being done. It goes on. We've been able to kind of accommodate the growth. The last 2 years, we've had over 44 million people use Logan in and out. We're in the mega category of airports. We're in the top 16 airports in the country as far as the passenger activity and airport operations. So, and we're getting ready for further growth or demand, and trying to do that responsibly, with the environment, knowing that that's very sensitive for the surrounding communities and the state itself. So we're doing everything with that in mind and trying to accomplish our goals and continue this rebuild. But it's this whole house. Every time you do something new to Logan Airport, it's been here 100 years, and we've been able to maintain this place and improve it, so that the traveling public, our ratings have gone up. I think it's a tribute to what the board has funded and how we've built this place. But again, the work continues. There's this demand, is going to go far beyond 44 million at some point. And so we've done the things that we need to do, and we need to think beyond that, for, future.
Airports today are balancing capacity, passenger experience, and security in new ways. What has become the most difficult to manage more than it was 15 to 20 years ago?
Our problems are congestion around our roadways. So, managing traffic, has been a continuous problem. But, I think we've done a pretty decent job, when the Ted Williams Tunnel was built, it really helped Logan Airport, with that traffic problem. But we really have only 3 outlets to the gateways when we're at our heaviest traffic, and that's 1A North, the Callahan Tunnel, Summer Tunnel, Callahan Tunnel, and the Ted Williams Tunnel. So we really have to staff our roadways properly so that we get traffic moving, so we don't have gridlock. That's one of our bigger problems. Once you get into our terminals, you'll be pleasantly surprised that the TSA staffing has been adequate or better, and our wait times have always been historically as good as they can be and best in the country. We help the TSA whenever we can. If we can help people divest, we try to make a pleasant experience when things don't go right. We have backup systems that we use with our K9 units. We work very closely with the TSA. Even they have their own K9 units. So inside the terminals, the traffic, the foot traffic flow is pretty good. It could be improved, but I think the one thing that lacks here, which we really, it's a little too late, is kind of a people mover situation where you can, get people moving. If you really step back and thought that there was a way to improve Logan, it would almost be to rebuild the whole thing, and that that would probably be an impossibility. But you wouldn't build a parking garage in the middle of an area that you could probably develop something like a consolidated check-in process where you could kind of tram people out to the secured areas. We thought about that, but it was too late. With the Logan Mod in the 90s, immediate decisions had to be made, and just to handle the traffic. So that was done. So we had to work around that, and we've done that, I think. But there's always ways to improve inside the terminals and the traffic experience with technology. We've embraced technology to try to give people, the ability to take a look at their travel before they leave their home. Obviously they can check in and do those things, but how do I get through terminal A, B, C and E? You can go online on our website and you can kind of map out your trip so that in advance, what to expect. We've got a great public, area people process where we have help that will help those who haven't traveled that often, and we try to greet them and help them through the process. We're forever putting out information about what's going on, depending on what's happening with weather, because we deal with a significant amount of weather, as in the Northeast. So, and we have a great snow program where we remove snow probably better than anybody in the country, and we've been awarded for that recognition. Again, our board has appropriated money to buy the most sophisticated equipment to remove snow and keep the airfield surfaces clean. And those are all things we do on a daily basis. Keeping in mind that we want people to be safe, secure, and we want to do an efficient process as they go through security. So, like I said, I think if we could make improvements on the congestion in the roadways, that's one of our biggest hurdles. But I think we've done a pretty good job handling the 44.5 million people that use this place and will continue to use. I think we've got a great menu of airlines too. We have over 40 airlines that operate here, and we have hundreds of nonstop destinations, of which I believe there's somewhere around 40 nonstop destinations internationally that we offer with all the international flag carriers and all our domestic partners. All the top airlines operate here.
Now, one of the things I love about this industry, I get to talk to somebody like you, is the fact that you're not only just, running an airport, but you're also, whenever you're traveling, you're looking at this, whatever airport you're at, through a totally different lens than anybody else in this industry, or for that matter, outside of this industry, is how they're looking at things. Right. And I'm kind of curious from that operator standpoint, where do you see the biggest disconnect between how airports are designed and how they actually function day to day?
Wow. It's I don't want to criticize. I appreciate people's pain points, when they get to airports. And it happens to me as a traveler, where, signage and wayfinding through the airport, navigating yourself through the airport can be very difficult. It's almost a disadvantage here, particularly when you come inbound, because our airplanes are 40 feet away from the baggage claim areas, the way we're built. You get off your airplane and within seconds you're down at the claim area, and you have to wait. If you have to wait 14, 15 minutes for your bag, it seems like a long time because you just got off your airplane, as opposed to other airports that, you have to walk, half a mile to get to where your baggage claim area is. I guess the disconnect is, there is a way, if you want to spend the money, to make that a better process, especially if you're in a tough climate environment. Do you build your terminals so that airplanes can get underneath an overhang, and have systems where, baggage systems go out to the door of the aircraft and the bags come right off, where you're not handling bags and crazy things happen. So there's kind of a disconnect, because I know, most of my counterparts feel the same way. I wish we could do this, but there's a huge cost to doing that kind of thing. And you have to weigh that. It's because, everything you do gets reflected on the cost of the airlines to operate and the price of the tickets that they have to charge to operate out of our airport. This market is an extremely good market. The Boston market has been great since I was here in '79. It's always been resilient. Passengers come here. They love coming to Boston. It's a great city to visit. There's a lot going on here. I don't really have to sell Boston. I just have to make the experience of their first arrival here as good as it can be. We just all try to do this, basically the same thing, but it can get very expensive. Anybody can build a terminal for $5 billion, but can any airline afford to operate out of that kind of situation? Can you capture the money that you need, to turn that money back in to, improve the rest of your airport? That's a tough situation. So I don't call it a disconnect. I just call it a cost of operating, and the fact that you have to deal with those realities, to make your airport a good airport. And sometimes I've been to even small airports that, smaller airports, let's say, that, I have my own problems trying to figure it out, and some of even the more efficient airports, there's still some pain you have to go through, to go get your rental car. You have to get in a van and go, miles off the airport to get it. And then when you return it, you got to reverse that situation. We're pretty tight here. So there's, you're not really going anywhere once you get here. And on this campus, we'll figure it out how to get you to the terminals. But, it's just there's so many different variables that make the airport environment, how to make it perfect is a tough thing to do. Even if you have an unlimited budget. I don't know many airports that have an unlimited budget, and you're in a regulatory environment, and you've got to play by the rules, and you've got to do things the right way, and that's tough. When you connect all those dots, you have a pretty good product, but tough business.
Yeah.
Great business, though.
That is very true. Absolutely.
Yep.
And you've been on both sides of this. You talked before, you were an airline guy, and then you moved over to the airport side of things. And in that time, the airline industry has changed dramatically. I mean, that's stating the obvious, and it continues to change. It's very dynamic and it's continuing to evolve.
Right.
How do you, when you look at this, how do you see the business model further evolving with the airlines for the airports as time's going to continue?
That's an interesting question, because as things evolve, what I see now is pretty obvious that the big legacy airlines are trying to use their size to its advantage by focusing on the premium product, which is difficult for the kind of low-cost carriers to do. We see it here. They build clubs. They increase the size of the premium seats in their airplanes. a first class, business class, where some of the low cost carriers aren't able to do that with the size of airplanes. Some of our domestic flag carriers that are flying the international markets with their bigger airplanes, it's an unbelievable advantage, to have wide body aircraft where you have plenty of room and you can expand your cabin. So right now I see the industry, I think, the legacies have an advantage there. At least the three big ones do, the biggest ones. But the others are going to struggle because their airplanes aren't made up as they fly now to offer more premium seats, a more premium product. It just doesn't start with the seats. It starts with the clubs that they're building. Fortunately for us, we have airline clubs and we have private clubs, and people want that. You wouldn't believe the success of the clubs here at Logan Airport, and we're building a new American Express Centurion Lounge that was announced the last couple of days, probably 3 years before you see that built. We've got a Chase Lounge, a private club now. We've got airline clubs. We've got JetBlue building their own club. Americans got a club. Delta's got clubs. And some of the internationals have their own clubs, Lufthansa, British Airways, Emirates. And those clubs are all full. They're packed. And you see, that the airlines that have those offerings are succeeding a little bit better than, some of the other airlines. We've got one airline that went bankrupt twice in the same year. That was, we lost 1 million seats here at Logan because of that one airline, unfortunate situation. And they're trying to recover still, but they're facing, that turn of events. I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. What happens to the economy, whether that swings back. But there was a time when ultra low-cost carriers and low-cost carriers had an advantage, with the evolution of JetBlue and all the other low-cost carriers. The legacy carriers became low-cost carriers. They fought back by keeping their prices, relatively close to where the low-cost could afford to operate. But now it's swung to the premium. So I see that, as an evolution that, I'm not sure everybody expected, but I think the big three have an advantage there, and rightfully so, because they've invested and done the things they need to do to get them in that position.
Now, you have additional uniqueness to your role, too, just for the fact that you've even had to step in an interim into CEO of the entire Massport organization a couple of years back, while that was going through a transitional period. Tell me, just going from, that to that, what kind of experience did that experience, what did it teach you about leading beyond aviation operations into a broader organizational strategy?
Well, I'll tell you that, I had a greater appreciation of what my colleagues, faced in their world. I truly enjoyed it. I was somewhat spoiled because people like Jen here and others kind of isolated me from some of the outside interference that you had to do as a CEO. I made it clear to the world that I was going to keep my aviation position. I think that was a good strategy because I was trying to run the airports and take over the roles of the CEO. Board asked me to do it. I said I would, but I wasn't going to relinquish my aviation responsibilities. It was a busy time. The breadth of what Massport does here, outside the airports is incredible. I learned a lot about, particularly the real estate side of our business. They've got a great leader there. We worked very closely. I got involved in a couple of big deals, which I really enjoyed. And then, the maritime area with the cruise and, the Conley terminal, I learned a lot about that. And I got much closer to a lot of my colleagues that I would have, as I worked my job, in aviation. So it was a great experience. We accomplished our goal. That was to keep the authority moving, try not to miss a step until the board was able to find, the person that would be able to, keep the ball rolling. And they did that. Rich Davies, a great CEO. He's young. He's energetic and smart, and he knows the political world. Part of that, a big part of that job is to try to protect the authority against, outside kind of, I'll call it interference, but, outside things that, you have to be aware of that I don't have to, deal with that as an aviation director. So yeah, I squeezed through 11 months, pretty much unscathed, knock on wood. But there were some challenging times. Things happen, and they happen in the other parts of the business. But overall, it's a good experience. I think I did the job the board wanted me to do, is keep the place together, and set it up so that the CEO that was following the one that left was coming into something that they wouldn't be overwhelmed in. We were able to get some major contracts done during that period. The Teamsters, our biggest union group, signed a 5-year deal during that period. We got our firefighters deal done during that period. Some of our other union groups had come forward. We had done a deal with the ILA over in the Seaport. So it was kind of a good time for a new CEO to come in, and it didn't fall apart, which is what my goal is to do. So yeah, great experience. Would I want to do it full time? No, not at 74 years old. I had no desire to keep going like that. But Jen appreciates it. I was meeting with Jen. Handles the media, and that's that can be challenging, especially when something happens. Either in the industry or outside the industry, but particularly in the industry, or any one of those phases of mass sports business. There are really three big phases, and it's the aviation, it's maritime, and real estate. So I really had up close and personal experience with those folks. They know what they're doing. It's great working with them, and this is a great organization. I was happy, and I was really happy when it ended.
I can imagine. So looking at this too, is that you've seen a lot of evolution in the industry, both airlines, airports, the way things operate, the way people travel, just everything how it seemed to be. For the next generation of airport leaders, what kind of skills or mindset shifts are now essential that maybe weren't when you started?
Well, I go back to the relationship issues, where you really got to bring everybody in and help them and trust them, and they'll trust you. Do the best you can with what you have, and be honest, about it, and speak from the heart. If you don't, they can find a phony in a second. So the longevity is because people trust you, and they appreciate the relationship. And I think that goes for new leadership as well. In this world, you've got to rally people around that accept the mission and want to move forward and do the job, and concentrate on the public and the traveling public, on what they want and need as technology. We haven't even talked about AI. How does AI play in this world, and who's going to manage the AI world? I'm not a big AI user, but I think that's something that has airports especially have to get their arms around, and leadership has to keep their eyes on that. But it's all about relationships, in my opinion. You got to have people. You have to surround yourself with great people, and you got to trust them, and you got to give them the leverage and the opportunity to make decisions, whether they're right or wrong, and know how to deal with them. When things don't go well. And you don't want to bully people around and push people around. You want to trust them and believe in them, and that's what I think leadership should look for.
And my last question for you today, you've seen a lot of different things, and obviously you're dealing with a lot of challenges today. That being said, as you're stepping away from your position, what is the one issue or opportunity in aviation that you think deserves more attention from airport leadership over the next decade?
Well, I think you got to consider the environment, and how that plays to what you're doing. And I think you work with the industry. I mean, I'm bullish because the airplanes that are being manufactured now are much more efficient and, less fuel burn. But at some point, the environment is a real issue, and, we need to kind of be aware of that and be able to do what we can in our industry. That's one thing. I mean, I think there's always going to be challenges. You have to know the risks in the world more than you ever did, and how that, plays into what's going on. You have to be ready and flexible with the cycles that you go through. They're going to continue. No one knew we were going to have a pandemic. No one knew we were going to have a 9/11. No one expected this recession we had in 2007. You have to be flexible enough to understand, how to go through that roller coaster ride and maintain your sanity and make sure you've got everybody continue to be focused. I could tell you stories about the pandemic. If we didn't, keep people's focus and get ready for when we came out of that thing, it would have been a horrible situation, but everybody did, and they worked through it and we managed it. And if you're going to take a role like this, it's a 24/7 job. You have to be ready. You have to understand what's going on and you have to be committed. And if you're not, you're not going to succeed, and people around you aren't going to believe in it. So you really got to commit yourself, and you have to do it the right way, with strong feelings and attitude, and keep people's best interests in mind, and treat them right, and then everything else will fall in place. So that's kind of the way we've managed and the way I've operated.
Thanks for tuning in to the Aviation Pros podcast, produced by Endeavor Business Media, a division of Endeavor B2B. Stay ahead in airport operations and leadership by subscribing to our Airport Business Daily newsletter and our monthly Airport Business Insider newsletter, only available to key decision makers in aviation. And don't forget to explore even more at AviationPros.com, the home of exclusive content for aviation professionals like yourself. I'm Joe Petrie. We'll catch you next time.